mass shooting in America. 5 killed in West Texas.
There's a shooting going on in Odessa, Texas. Oh God, they're shooting right there.
Plus, Americans growing more pessimistic about the economy. But President Trump says not to worry.
The stock market's doing well. The economy is doing great. Worldwide, we're the number one by far.
The 2020 frontrunners prepare for their most important debate yet. At center stage, Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren.
Well, I'm just going to be me and she'll be her and let people make the judgments.
And Hurricane Dorian takes aim for the U.S. mainland.
We're hoping that everything comes out okay, but I'm kind of freaking out.
Inside Politics, the biggest stories sourced by the best reporters now. Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Manu Raju. In this morning for John King, a lot of breaking news for you this morning. Hurricane Dorian just minutes ago upgraded to a Category 5 storm with 160-mile-an-hour sustained winds, and it's closing in on the Bahamas. The latest forecast has the storm slowing down, then lurking off the Florida and southeastern U.S. coastline for much of the week. We will go to the CNN Weather Center for the latest forecast in just a bit. But we have to start with yet another mass shooting, this time in the West Texas cities of Midland and Odessa. 5 people are dead, 21 injured. The suspect shot dead by police. And authorities say it started Saturday afternoon with a traffic stop on Interstate 20 near Midland. The man used a rifle to shoot at state troopers, and then he sped away, taking random shots at passing cars and pedestrians, eventually hijacking a postal vehicle and making his way towards Odessa, still spraying gunfire. The chase ended with a gun battle in a movie theater parking lot.
There's a shooting going on in Odessa, Texas. Oh God, they're shooting right there.
Oh, duck it down. Duck it down.
Oh my God. Cody, are you down?
Are you shooting that man and that lady right there?
I don't know. I can't see.
In addition to the 5 dead, the list of injured includes 3 law enforcement officers and a 17-month-old girl who is expected to survive. Let's go to CNN's Ed Lavandera. Ed, what are you learning on the ground?
Well, Manu, this was a surreal and wild scene that an Odessa police officer just described as something that they'd never anticipated and really had never seen before nor trained for, because of the sporadic and the widespread nature of where all of these different shootings took place. So in many of these mass shootings, it all takes place in one location, but this was spread over miles and miles across this city, and calls were coming in constantly of people being wounded by gunfire, which just added to the chaos of the moment. This was, as you mentioned, a wild scene. 5 people dead, nearly 24 injured. Among those dead, a high school student here in Odessa, and among the wounded is a 17-month-old child who was airlifted to a hospital in Lubbock, Texas, and we are told now is in satisfactory condition. But from people who were here on the front lines dealing with this chaos, they described a frightening scene.
I encourage everyone in every community, no matter what size, if you're in the middle of the desert, you're in an urban area, to prepare in advance. Unfortunately, it may not be a matter of if, it may be a matter of when. It starts with knowing how to stop bleeding. It starts with how to do BLS and chest compressions. And this is something that we as Americans can do.
And Manu, we've been told here this morning by Odessa police that there had been a press conference scheduled for 9:30 Central Time this morning. That has now been pushed back until noon Central Time, so 1 o'clock Eastern, before we get any more information, as investigators here continue working around the clock to piece together how all of this unfolded and determining a motive behind this attack. Manu?
A lot of unanswered questions from a horrific scene and yet another mass shooting at Lavandera. Thank you for that. Now joining us with the reporting and their insights, Margaret Taleb from Axios, Time Magazine's Molly Ball, Michael Shear from the New York Times, and Laura Barone Lopez from Politico. I want to start with what Mike Pence said on his way to Warsaw when he was asked about what happened yesterday in Texas.
Our hearts break
for the families who have loved ones who've been injured, those who had loved ones who've lost their lives in the wake of this latest mass shooting. And the President and I and our administration remain absolutely determined to work with leaders in both parties in the Congress to take such steps that we can address and confront this scourge of mass atrocities in our country.
Now, the Vice President says that they want to work with Congress, but there's been virtually no action. There has been no action since the latest mass shootings, 2 that occurred not even a month ago. The president's been all over the map about what he would accept on background checks. What do you think the president's ultimately going to accept here?
Yeah, I don't see any reason, unfortunately, to see that anything has changed over the course of the last 48 hours or 24 hours. That we now know that in the month of August alone, there were more than 50 fatalities in the U.S. as a result of mass shootings. But there's no indication that there's been a turning point in the president's political calculus or in the Republican Party's political calculus in terms of Congress. And so when we get back, I think there's no more certainty than there was before, and now there's a hurricane in the mix on top of it.
Yeah, and the support for new gun laws is overwhelming in this country. Just look at this Quinnipiac poll from earlier this week. Universal background checks, which is what the House passed and which has virtually no chance of passing the Republican-led Senate, 93% of voters support that. And even 60% of voters support an assault weapons ban. But it appears that there will be some discussion maybe about doing something about red flags legislation, but presumably that won't go as far enough as a lot of people will like. Will that be enough, do you think, to satisfy the electorate if Congress were to pass something that may be considered, or some response to it, but not as far as what majorities of Americans want?
I think you are seeing increasing pressure from the public on politicians on this issue. What has happened is not only that the public favors new gun control laws by really a margin that we have not seen in decades, but also the intensity on this issue has really increased. There are new activist movements. You have people fired up about this issue, voting on this issue in a way that previously I think we had this impression that there was a lopsided passion dynamic where it was the NRA members and the anti-gun control folks who were more likely to be single issue voters. You now see a lot of that on the other side, and I think it has created more pressure.
Yeah.
But the Democrats, had this debate earlier in August about whether they should come back to Washington, pass more laws than they already have, having already passed the background law. And the argument was, no, we've done our part. Let's keep the pressure on the Senate, keep the pressure on Mitch McConnell to do something with the law that we've already passed, and the Senate obviously.
And listen to how Beto O'Rourke, the 2020 presidential candidate, talked about this. As you mentioned, Democrats seem to be more engaged than they have in the past. This is how he talked about the aftermath of the shooting.
Don't know what the motivation is, do not yet know the firearms that were used or how they acquired them. But we do know this is up. There is no reason that we have to accept this as our fortune, as our future, as our fate, and yet functionally, right now, we have.
I mean, Democrats used to be afraid to talk about gun control. Now they are not.
No, they're very confident in this area. They feel as though the momentum, the public sentiment is at their backs. And this is something that I've seen on the campaign trail. Last cycle, a number of House races and House districts that flipped where gun control was a key issue there. And you heard a lot of voters who said that they had never been engaged before, but because of the mass shootings from Parkland on to now, they felt as though they needed to become more engaged, that they were afraid about this issue. And that being said, House Democrats, yes, had the debate about whether or not to come back. They were originally supposed to come back this next week, and they delayed that because of Hurricane Dorian. So it looks like the earliest hearing that House Democrats may even have on this issue is when they fully return September 9th.
And there's the segue to the next big breaking story of this moment, that Hurricane Dorian now officially upgraded to a powerful Category 5 hurricane, and on an erratic path. It poses a threat from Florida all the way up to the Carolinas, forcing many cities along its path to begin putting emergency plans in place. I want to go to CNN meteorologist Allison Chinchar. Allison, the Bahamas will feel Dorian first. When do you expect landfall?
Right, imminently. And I would like to point out that the National Hurricane Center, in the latest update they just gave, referred to this as a catastrophic landfall. for the Bahamas. And again, we're not just talking the winds, although yes, those have increased up around 160 miles per hour, gusting even higher up around 185 miles per hour. But the storm surge is going to be a huge factor for a lot of these islands. 15, if not even potentially as high as 20 feet. The eye of the hurricane has also expanded a little bit as well. This is concerning because this just goes to show that the storm is still intensifying. We do expect, as those hurricane hunters have gone out and taken some of those numbers, that this will maintain a major hurricane as it continues its trek off to the west. It is still headed towards Florida. More of Florida was added back into the cone of uncertainty this morning, which has been removed partially yesterday. So Florida, Manu, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina are all still in the potential for a landfall from this storm over the next couple of days.
We'll keep watching this. It changes by the minute, it seems. Thank you for that. And next for us, the Trump trade war, new tariffs in effect as of today on thousands of Chinese-made goods.
I have
just upgraded Dorian to a Category 5 catastrophic storm with 160-mile-an-hour sustained winds. It's threatening the Bahamas, Florida, and the U.S. Southeast, and we'll get a live update in just a little bit. But back to politics for now. The stage is set for the next Democratic debate singular. And now that's thanks to stricter qualifying requirements from the DNC. The next debate, less than 2 weeks away, will be a one-night event. 10 candidates made the cut, and it's worth pointing out that just 3 of them are straight white men. And for the first time this campaign, the 3 frontrunners, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they will all share the same stage. Now, Biden enters the debate holding steady atop the pack, but with Warren's star on the rise in recent weeks, will voters finally see a showdown between her fiery brand of liberalism and his more moderate approach? Biden, for his part, downplays the possibility of fireworks.
This is the first time you'll be on stage with Elizabeth Warren. Is there a certain contrast you're hoping to draw with her?
No, those people, I'm just going to be me and she'll be her and let people make the judgments. I have great respect for her.
But Biden still has the lead, and Warren's clearly emerging as this threat. Will we finally see this one-on-one confrontation between them, and what will that look like?
Well, I would not be surprised to see it, and I would not be surprised to see it in particular on economic issues. There's some history here. This isn't just about 2 different brands of politics or 2 different sort of ideological dispositions. Warren has gone after Biden himself very sharply in the past. When she was working on bankruptcy issues, there was a hearing where they got very testy between the 2 of them, and she writes about, she really targets him in one of her books as the type of sort of corporate Democrat that she sets herself against. So whether it's that issue or just economic issues in general, I would not be surprised to see a very sharp contrast drawn. And I think that all of us in the pundit talkers here sort of licking our lips excited for that, because in part because they haven't been on the same stage before. Yeah. They are at this point either the top 2 or in the top 3 candidates. They have their differences. It will be really, and they are both, very substantive people on policy. So it will be very interesting and potentially revealing for voters to see the 2 of them actually discuss these things.
And how will Warren take some of the incoming fire? Also, a big question. She's been, she had the rocky launch to her campaign amid the questions about her claiming Native American ancestry. Then she's been fairly smooth. She's been rising in the polls. She has not taken many incoming attacks. But here's some comments from adversaries in this story from Politico. The headline is Warren Love Fest ending as 2020 competitors fear her rise. This is a quote from Dick Harpootlian. He says her economics are fraud, and at some point someone is going to point that out. She's a multimillionaire professor at Harvard. She can't rail against the 1%. She is one of the 1%. He is a South Carolina state senator and a Biden ally. But also Bakari Sellers, the Harris campaign South Carolina co-chair, says the biggest criticism of Elizabeth Warren is her inability to make her plan's actual reality. There are a lot of voters, especially black voters, who will say a lot of this is pie in the sky and we want pie on the table. How does she respond to this?
Right. Well, I mean, another interesting aspect about this upcoming debate is that Harris is also for the first time going to be on the stage with Warren. They've never been on the debate stage together as well. So whether or not Harris decides to attack her, as Bakari Sellers slightly telegraphed there, on issues about her economics plan, Warren so far, has still been defending it very very aggressively. If she goes for Biden, I think she may initiate that attack. Biden's campaign has often said that he doesn't initiate attacks. He takes the incoming and then responds and pushes back.
Yeah,
so it dynamics to.
Well, I was just going to say, and there's the other person that we shouldn't forget about, right, is Bernie Sanders, who is on the stage as well. And it may be that, if he wasn't, if it was just Elizabeth Warren versus Biden, they might sort of tiptoe around each other. But, in some sense, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders both have an incentive to prove that they're the ones that are going to take on Biden and sort of by default then be the ones to take on Trump if they were to win. And you could see the clashing escalate because the two of them are trying to sort of see which one can be tougher.
And we've seen a number of Biden missteps since day one of this campaign. I mean, just look at the headlines, and including last week, the big one from the Washington Post as he campaigns for president. Joe Biden tells a moving but false war story. He's claimed that the spirit of his story was correct, even though the details were mostly false. But still, at the same time, despite all these problems, look at the polls. I mean, overall, when you look at the demographics among Democratic-leaning voters in this Quinnipiac poll just out last week, only very liberal voters and people from the 18 to 34 support two other candidates, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. But look at this. I mean, everywhere else, every other ideological group, somewhat liberal, moderate, conservative, men, women, black, different ages, different income levels, all support Joe Biden at the moment. I mean, in this world, the Trump world of falsehoods and things that the president says, if Biden makes mistakes and commits gaffes on the campaign trail, does it really have that much of an impact?
That's why he's not going after Elizabeth Warren. Also because that wouldn't seem like a Joe Biden thing to do, right? But that base, the liberal base, to some extent the younger voters, all that matters when it comes to turnout. And of course, the ongoing question in this early stage of this election has been, once you get a nominee, whoever is running against Donald Trump, are Democrats going to turn out in the highest numbers or in kind of like Hillary numbers in some of those places where it really mattered last time around, And the thing that I think that I'm a little concerned about looking forward to this debate is that the format, I think, it's still a crowded stage, and it still may not allow for what we really want to see, which is both the deep substantive differences among really the leading candidates, but also that back and forth, the ongoing sustained back and forth, which is like, how does Elizabeth Warren deal with Biden? How does Sanders deal with Warren? How does Biden deal with those two? If you add up Sanders support and Warren support, they actually give Joe Biden quite a run for his money, but they both can't emerge, and so it's going to break at some point. Maybe, I don't know if it's going to be sooner or later, but when it does, then that's what and
it'll be interesting to see how those other candidates fare. The people on the stage who need that breakout moment, do they go the way of what Christian Gillibrand last week, dropping out of the race? We shall see. Hurricane Dorian just upgraded to a powerful Category 5 storm. Next, we'll go live to the Bahamas, which is now bracing for a direct hit.
Thank you to everything that gets in the way of our love for driving.
Sustained winds. Now, the slow-moving storm likely will remain a threat for much of the coming week. Millions of people in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas are waiting to see whether it will take aim at them or just stay off the coast. Right now, it's headed for the northwestern Bahamas, and that's where we find CNN's Patrick Oppman in Freeport this morning. Patrick, behind you, it looks beautiful right now, but it sure isn't going to stay that way, is it?
No, absolutely not. And it is a beautiful morning here, but we know in the hours ahead, the weather conditions are going to deteriorate, and very, very quickly. Already about 80 miles to the east of where I am, they're beginning to feel the effects of this incredibly powerful and slow-moving hurricane, and that's particularly dangerous because the longer a hurricane of this magnitude is over you, the more damage it does, the more winds lash people's homes and places where they're taking refuge. You can expect to have a higher storm surge, and there's so many of these islands are low-lying. Many of them are just above sea level. We've actually been seeing people get evacuated to where we are because it's higher ground, but the highest point of land on this island, Manu, is only 30 feet high. We're talking about a storm surge, an expected storm surge of 15 to 20 feet. So much of this island, many of the islands around us, in the coming days and hours will be underwater. It is about as dangerous as you can get to be on a low-lying island, to have a slow-moving Cat 5 hurricane coming your way. And unlike the United States, where there's still some doubt, there's no doubt here we're going to take a direct hit.
And when do authorities in the Bahamas hope to get help there after Dorian moves out?
You know, the problem is we're on an island, of course, and the airport has been closed. We got on one of the last flights on Thursday, so probably not till midweek, but it just depends on how badly damaged the airport is, when they could get a boat in here.
Patrick Oppman in the Bahamas there. Thanks for joining us, and we'll keep monitoring this as the day progresses. Next up for us here, ex-Defense Secretary Jim Mattis speaks out, but not about President Trump, at least not yet. Here's something you don't see every day, a high-resolution picture of the aftermath of an Iranian rocket's launch pad explosion. The image from last week, likely highly classified, as you can see. It's an image tweeted out to the world by the President of the United States. The President also seemed to be taunting the Iranians, writing the United States of America was not involved in the catastrophic accident. He wrote, "I wish Iran best wishes and good luck in determining what happened." Now, some are questioning whether the tweet revealed any sensitive national security secrets with those tweets, but the President is not one of them.
We had a photo and I released it, which I have the absolute right to do. And we'll see what happens, because they had a big mishap. It's unfortunate. And so Iran, as you probably know, they were going to set off a big missile and it didn't work out too well. Had nothing to do with us.
The president wants to have talks with Iran, then he taunts Iran, and then he may put out classified information. What is the strategy?
Well, I mean, I think the strategy...
Is there a strategy?
Well, I think in some ways it's pretty clear. The president has from the beginning said that he wants to put greater and greater pressure on Iran, and thought that the Iran nuclear deal that had been put in place by the previous administration didn't do that and let the pressure off too much on a regime that is particularly bad in the region and around the world. And so I think that's ultimately the grand strategy. But what doesn't make a lot of sense a lot of times is the sort of tactical moves along the way, and I think the question of whether or not the president was given this photo, had a substantive conversation with his national security team and said, let's all talk about whether or not this picture is, should be something that is releasable, or whether he just saw it, grabbed a phone, and took a picture of it. I mean, that I think is the real question, because the difference matters.
Yeah, and
in fact, if you look at the picture, you can see the shadow, and it's like, what the shadow is when you're trying to take a picture of a receipt, and you're and you got that image of yourself on there.
Yeah.
He's right. He's got the absolute. He decides what gets declassified. He can declassify it instantly like that, and it's fine for him to do. And when he goes on a rant about leakers, this is not a leak. He's the president. He can declassify it. But there are implications to it, and there are implications if this wasn't kind of strategized on the front end. And one of those is that it allows all these foreign governments, not just the Iranians, but the Russians, the Chinese, whoever, to understand what our capabilities are in the air over that area. Yeah. What are U.S. surveillance capabilities?
Detailed.
These are not images that are commercially available. Right. And so at least the initial reaction from kind of the intel community at large, the people who have access to, is one of real surprise and sort of shocking.
And did the U.S. violate Iranian airspace? A big question going forward. Now, I also want to talk about Jim Mattis, the former defense secretary who abruptly left the administration and had a lot of questions about when he will speak out. And he is sort of speaking out now. He says to the Atlantic last week, the duty of silence. If you leave an administration, you owe some silence. When you leave an administration over clear policy differences, you need to give the people who are still there as much opportunity as possible to defend the country.